only mode.
Good morning. It's a beautiful spring day here in Atlanta, and our good friend Brenda Truelove tells us it's a gorgeous spring day in Tuscaloosa. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Bill Baker. I'm with Firestorm. Today we're discussing time is not on your side. We're talking about how things can be very time sensitive and how we can respond. We'd also like to have you become our friend on Facebook, Firestorm Solutions, and please follow us on Twitter at Firestorm Soul. There is a hashtag. That hashtag is Crisis Coach. Firestorm transforms crisis into value and empowers you to manage risk and crises. Firestorm expertise is crisis management, critical decision support, crisis communications, crisis public relations, and consequence management. We would like to remind you our presentation is not complete without the accompanying oral comments and discussion, and this work product should be discussed in conjunction with advice from your organization's personal counsel. Do not interpret it as legal advice or legal opinion. Our presenter and moderator today is Karen Masullo. Karen is the Executive Vice President of Firestorm. She's also the Chief Intelligence Officer. And she is very adept and very knowledgeable in training and in social media programs, and especially in the subject we're discussing today. Karen, over to you, please.
Thank you so much, Bill. Everyone, thank you for joining us today. We always enjoy these sessions with our sponsor today and our underwriter of this session and partner in many great projects, and that is the University of Alabama Bama at Work program. Just before we talk a little bit to the Bama at Work folks, I'd like to let you know if you have any questions or comments, you can use the GoToWebinar sort of console. It should be on the right-hand side of your screen, little dashboard there. There's a chat area or a comment or question section. We may not get to your questions today, but we certainly want to, and we'll follow up with an email. If you have any questions specifically for Brenda Truelove from the University of Alabama, her contact information will also be on the screen. And so I'd like to introduce our good friend from the Bama at Work program, Brenda Truelove. And Brenda's going to talk to you a little bit about a special program, and then we'll jump into our subject matter for the day. Brenda?
Thank you, Karen, and good morning, everyone. Coming to you from the campus of the University of Alabama. It's a beautiful spring day. Our weather's going to be up in the 80s today, but we are always thinking about what keeps us up at night and working with our clients from Bama at Work to try to help them turn their pains into gains. So we listen to a lot of corporate and middle management executives and try to help them work on their succession planning, their leadership development, talent training. Really, communication is in the foundation of all the work problems that we all face, but we also provide everyday training to help people learn how to listen to each other better, perform comprehensive needs assessment, just identify the resources that each individual company who contacts us that they might need to help make their company or their organization more successful. So we're here to connect the full resources of the University of Alabama to help individuals, corporations meet their needs. Our Corporate Engagement Division Director is Dr. Bob Prescott. Dr. Bob has been in corporate life and in education for over 20 years. He most recently served as Associate Professor of Management at the Crummer Graduate School of Business in Rollins College. Dr. Bob is a graduate of the University of Alabama and came home to Bama last year, so we're very fortunate to have his leadership. And we're just really excited about the future for Bama at Work, and just want to encourage anyone who just simply wants to talk, bounce ideas. I'm here to do that. My contact information's on the screen. My email address is easy to remember, truelove@ccs.ua.edu, and my telephone number is 205-348-9066. Thank you, Karen, for this great opportunity today, and I'm looking forward to learning from you as I always do.
Oh, thank you, Brenda. And I encourage anyone on the call for your organization to reach out to the University of Alabama. They've got great facilities on campus for your next conference. For their upcoming conferences, again, contact Brenda. She can tell you all about the special programs. And we really appreciate the partnership we've had with you for such a long time. So what are we talking about today? Again, I want to thank you for being with us. We are following up on what we started at the beginning of the year. So if you've been with us for our other sessions and follow through the 12 sessions that we have in our Crisis Coach series throughout the year, we started off with a look back at 2016, what the risks were, and did an assessment of what we thought was coming in 2017. We talked about benchmarking your preparedness, how you can assess your organization, the readiness of your people, and what are those threats that might be coming your way. And the reason we do that, of course, is because we know that when minutes matter, seconds count. So we want you to be completely ready to go and prepared. So today, what we're going to talk about is getting together with your teams. And if your team is just you, buy yourself lunch and sit down. We want to think through our predict, plan, perform methodology and start with that predict piece following the general assessment we did the last couple of months, what risks might exist in my organization that I haven't really documented. How can I document those? And then how can I go about communicating both internally and externally, not only what those risks are, but what our response may be to our stakeholders and others when they inquire about the risk or a crisis event. So what does that mean? You know, everything you learn about a crisis in the first hours is wrong. We had a couple of crises this week. We do every week at Firestorm. And one in particular I thought of quite a lot because almost everything that we learned about it was incorrect. The name of someone who was involved was not only incorrect, it was the wrong gender. There was just so much information that was inaccurate because people at the scene see different things, certainly. And we're not all trained police investigators, so we don't understand or we don't always know how to question those witnesses in order to see if we can get some consistent statements from them. So the worst thing we can do is just immediately react to whatever misinformation is coming our way. If you are the communications person for your organization, or if you're involved with the leadership of communications in your organization, whether you're a school or a business or a nonprofit, the best thing you can do when a crisis occurs is to stop and think, why are we communicating and what are the facts about that which we are communicating, and does this need to be communicated at this time? Everybody says in the middle of a crisis, what are we going to do? What should we say? And most of our senior leadership are trained to make decisions based on what? The information you have in front of you, data, the big data, small data, and policy. You have policies and procedures set up so that you know how to proceed with a certain piece of type of communication. But in a crisis, the world gets turned upside down. The information you first receive is generally wrong, and the data that you're going to base some of your decisions on may not be available, or it too may be compromised or incorrect. You don't have policies that exist because perhaps the thing that happened has never happened before, or it had never happened in quite that way. We had a crisis that happened with one of our clients this week who called someone else to reach out to me. I talk with this person almost every other day. This person has my number. They have thousands of emails over our 4-year relationship with my signature and phone number at the bottom. I have them on 3 different numbers in my phone on speed dial because we communicate so much, but they were in a panic. And it was something so unusual that she just stopped for a moment and couldn't think about how to grab me, and so called one of our main numbers, which is great because she immediately got me. But it just goes to show you what can happen in a crisis. Your command and control are lost, and you must recognize, no matter what the crisis is, your brand and reputation are at stake or under attack, because you don't want to allow whatever your first response is to become the secondary crisis. And it's important to remember that preparedness and resiliency are brand attributes. The better you handle a situation, no matter how deep the crisis, the stronger your leadership and reinforcement of your brand to the public, your employees, your vendors, your clients, your community, public officials will be. Do we know we can trust you that if a crisis does occur, you can handle things in a crisis? Your leadership will become involved and engaged personally. You're going to have a lot of people with a lot of opinions making decisions at a very chaotic time. And the impacts of one decision are disproportionate to what occurs when business is occurring as usual. That came out very odd, but I hope you understand what I meant. And the events are continually escalating. And again, you can't let that secondary crisis, that initial communication become your secondary crisis based upon the information that you share. Also, you have media involved, and each time a new piece of information is discovered or thought to be discovered, it's going to percolate that situation back up in the news again. I think there's nothing a news organization likes better than saying new details just in. And so you may think you have everything under control, and then suddenly that next shoe drops and the situation escalates in a different direction or a bit more. And speed becomes quality, even survival, how well you react, how quickly you can respond. And that's why we're talking about time today, because time becomes your most important commodity in a crisis. And you are going to become the center of media focus. You, your senior leadership, your organization, your very survival suddenly is at stake. I'm going to tell you a very simple story about a situation that occurred. It's not a huge crisis, but it gives you an illustration of how communication can quickly go wrong over the smallest thing. We recently had an organization that's a scholastic organization that had a terrible weather blow through their area. And during that period of time, the power went out to one of their elementary schools. And so they were trying to decide whether they were going to cancel school that day because the power was out. And they were going to be able to function pretty well without the power. They had some backup power. They might have cold lunches for the first lunch group. And so at about 5:30 in the morning, a communication went out to everyone who needed this communication that they were trying to decide whether school would continue that day. They'd let everyone know as soon as possible because a tree came down and knocked out power to the school in the storm at approximately 5 o'clock that morning. That communication went out to everyone within the school internally that needed to know and made its way externally to Facebook. As soon as it was posted on Facebook, everybody chimed in, oh, do our children have school or not? And one person who had a pretty significant following socially within this little community said, I don't understand. Our power went out at 1 o'clock in the morning. That's when the trees came down. But your communication says 5 o'clock. Why the discrepancy? Who did you hear this from? When did you hear it? And suddenly, the conversation turned into why the school put out a message that a tree had come down at 5 o'clock when that's not what everybody said what was happened. And it was very confusing because it wasn't important. There was no reason to include that detail in the communication. And that detail was included without verification. My first question to my contact was, who told you this? Who told that person? Well, I think was the response. Whenever you start asking yourself, who communicated, I think is not a good answer. I know. I personally spoke to the fire department or the police officials on scene. We can't guess at facts or create alternate facts, but that's another webinar. So we want to just look at some examples in the news when we see how things go wrong, how quickly they can escalate publicly, and we need to consider who is held responsible ultimately. You know, this is sort of maybe a bit humorous. We all saw that at the Oscars, the wrong envelope was handed to the presenters. Now, I don't mean to minimize what a great role it is that PricewaterhouseCoopers plays in the delivery of the envelope, but you've got one job, maybe two, and that is to make sure the envelopes with the winners are protected and that they are delivered to the right person in a timely manner, and that the right envelope is delivered. So I would have to think and hope that you might have a contingency plan regarding that. So if on the way to the Oscars we lose the envelopes, do we have a backup plan? Do we have backup envelopes? I would hope we did. And at some point in time in a meeting, somebody should have had a conversation that said, what happens if we give them the wrong envelope? What do we do next? So we want to be able to take a really good look at ourselves and do a really good assessment of how we do business on a daily basis in those normal and abnormal or unusual times, and have contingency plans and messaging built in. Now, I don't think it really killed PricewaterhouseCoopers' reputation. Sadly, the two accountants who were in charge of the envelopes are not allowed back to the Oscars. But now I want to give you another situation that's a little bit different. And I'm not showing this to you to be salacious in any way. I'm showing it to you so I can give you an example of what Jim Satterfield, our CEO, says. The last time I had a surprise, I was 5 years. The last time I enjoyed a surprise, I was 5 years old, and it was my birthday. This is it's a sad situation. There was a woman who was a very well-regarded, well-respected employee of a visitors bureau. She was a director level, a woman in her early 60s, and also did some of the social media messaging for the visitors bureau. And regrettably and accidentally, she posted an adult video to the Convention Bureau's Instagram account that was meant to be posted to her private account to be shared only with her spouse. And it was posted, I believe, later in the evening, and so it was up for a very long time, and it created significant embarrassment, as you can certainly imagine, for the person, for her husband, for their careers, for their businesses. And it is a good illustration of how no matter how often I hear that would never happen here. Our employees would never do something like that. It can happen, and you've got to think through who has access to whatever communication tools we have in the organization, and have we planned for accidental messaging, inadvertent messaging? Do we have good plans in place to lower our risk? You know, we work really hard at Firestorm to make sure we don't message from our business accounts and our personal accounts on the same devices. Is it a little extra work? Yes. Will we avoid something that could potentially be embarrassing to ourselves or our clients? I hope so. So we really want to build it in beforehand in the predict phase, but just in case, we want to plan for the eventuality that something could happen so that we can perform appropriately. Because the buck stops at the top, and the top might get upset and have it trickle down a little bit. We saw that Wells Fargo had to slash the CEO's bonuses because of accountability for some very significant decisions and discrepancies. And this is something we saw just recently after the President's State of the Union address. A gentleman named Dan Grillo posted on Twitter, and I think all of us have seen, I never expected to see some of the things that we're seeing today on Twitter. So I'm just as surprised as anyone else. But when you see something that you just know that person just should have thought before they hit that send button. And this was a message to the wife of a soldier who lost his life in service for his country. And she was given a 2-minute standing ovation at the State of the Union. And Dan Grillo put out, sorry, Owen's wife, you're not helping yourself or your husband's memory by standing there and clapping like an idiot. Trump just used you. Now, this person was fired, and I think it's important that we sit down with our teams and say, you can't just, if you are a representative of this company, of our organization, there are certain things you can say on social media that are protected, and we understand that, but let's try not to be an insensitive fool, because it's not acceptable. And how will you manage it if and when that happens? Do you have a contingency plan for that? Because again, the CEO or senior leadership is where the buck stops. I want to recommend a book to you. I came across this book when I was doing some research for a couple of articles I was writing, or I had written in the past. And John Ronson, who is also a contributor for the New York Times, followed a couple of people that we spoke about in 2002, 2003, and 2014. And they were folks that did something really unforgivable publicly on social media. And he followed them 3, 4, 5 years after to see what the impacts have been. And the impacts are significant. Sit down with your teams, buy a pizza or something healthier, and talk about these types of risks and risks or behaviors that they've seen, and walk through with your teams, how would we message if something like that occurred in our organization? If tomorrow morning the CEO of your organization or the head of school of your private school or someone on the board of your nonprofit organization does something ill-advised on social media or otherwise, doesn't have to be on social media, it's just going to spread there no matter what it is, do you have a plan for how you'll respond? So I advise that you read this book, read it with your teams. It's a good study. I don't know Mr. Ronson, but I think he did a good job. So as we move forward, what should we do? And what's our advice as to what the next steps are when it comes to figuring out what your communications should be? Well, I found this from Forbes.com, and actually I thought it was humorous. I think it's true, but I thought it was humorous. The 10 leadership blind spots that they predicted for 2017 basically come down to don't trust anything or anyone. Don't trust big data or small data. Don't trust branding. Don't trust experts. Don't trust the stars. Don't trust your instincts. Don't trust minimizers. Don't trust maximizers. Don't trust the wisdom of the crowd. Don't trust that you know who to trust. Don't trust your strategy alone. And don't trust your ability to control the message. When you're messaging, we are messaging to help clarify facts if required or if necessary to an event. We're trying to educate and guide right decisions, saving or helping people protect their persons and property, especially in an emergency. We want to make sure that people are not putting themselves at risk, so we want to give them good information. We also want to correct any misinformation that may be out there, and misinformation during a crisis has become something that is all too common by people who want to create a little anarchy. And we have to be very careful in how we word things. It's not about the tree that came down and took out the power. It's about the fact the power was out. The difference between the almost right word and the right word is really a large matter. It's the difference between the lightning bug and the lightning. So, in a crisis, the best thing you can do is buy time. We want to create a time machine for you. And our time machine isn't something out of, well, that we're not going to go back in time. It's more like an ATM. We want to be able to go to it and buy a little time. Because confusion during a crisis is just like my client who, for some reason, forgot where to go to get my number and had to call someone else. In a crisis, when it's a deep crisis, you don't know perhaps how you will respond and how you will react. Confusion costs time. Plans and message maps then become a time machine for you. The plans are designed to buy you time when you need it most. In a severe crisis, when seconds matter, the police will arrive in minutes. And it is important that you may not know exactly what to do in the specific crisis, but by practicing, by having communication ready to go, it buys your brain time to not be clouded by all of the other incidences that you have to take care of. I don't know if any of you on this call have ever listened to a 911 call from an instance of workplace violence. I will tell you it's disturbing, and if it can trigger any responses in people who are vulnerable to triggers, please don't listen. But as an exercise in understanding, you can Google some 911 calls from a workplace shooting incident or others. And as a learning tool, it's important for us to understand the chaos that ensues, even in those organizations where preparedness is deeply ingrained in their culture. We don't want to frighten people. We don't want to scare people. We want to save people. So it's important that we understand, by being prepared, no matter how chaotic the situation, we may be able to move forward in order to save people and property under our purview. By identifying your risks, developing plans, training your people, and then exercising those plans, we buy extra time when you need it the most. And remember, after a crisis is when armchair quarterbacking occurs. if only we had, you know, except for this happening, we could have done this. Let's do all of that before a crisis occurs so that we can more effectively help our employees, if we're schools, certainly our students, parents, our clients, vendors, visitors to our operations, our buildings, our campuses, and the ultimate survival of our business organization. When it comes to crisis communications management, I just want to think very simply of our 4 M's: the message, where it's going, to what media and how are we going to monitor that, the impact, the sentiment, and how will we measure what we're seeing through the metrics. We have some great tools that address that, and certainly you can email us at webinars@firestorm.com, and we'll be happy to talk about that. Next month, as a matter of fact, we're going to be talking about predictive intelligence and how you really do go about monitoring and metrics. And it is the next logical step in our succession of crisis coach sessions. So please do join us for that, because we really want to be highly sensitive to the risks and rewards that flow from communicating on and with traditional and new media platforms, especially in times of crisis. And again, I think we've seen through our president, we're seeing social used in a way that has just never been used before. And you do have some influence now in communicating directly with your stakeholders. If you think you can control the media, that's never going to happen. But we do have a way now to be able to communicate with our stakeholders more quickly and more clearly than ever before. We've seen events on campuses throughout 2016. I think the Ohio State University was a really good example of that, of how communication came out, how communication was on their website. They inserted the right hashtag into their messaging so that it got into the media and communications flow. So there was some preparation done there that I think was highly effective in the crisis that occurred. And action steps, remember, are guidance to avoid pitfalls. And message mapping is to be created and utilized as applicable to the situation. So we're going to sit down and we're going to look at, with our teams, what possible scenarios could occur. And remember, we don't have to message in every situation immediately, especially when facts are not known. So we really want to think through how we'll communicate, when we'll communicate for very specific audiences and situations. The first thing we're going to do is prepare a list of stakeholders and their concerns. And the stakeholder community is going to vary with the type of event. So if we have a situation where one of our products has been recalled, or we serve food in one of our food service organizations and there's been a recall on a specific food type, that's going to be different. Our stakeholders may be different than if, say, we have a hurricane warning or a tornado or an earthquake or something like that. So we really need to think through some of those different scenarios. Now, Jim Satterfield is really married to saying 5 why. And when he communicates, whether it's on behalf of a client when we're working with a specific client or internally or for external communications, he asks himself why 5 times. Why am I saying this? Who am I saying it to, and why? Why do they need this information? And if at the end of 5 times he has a really good reason for having to get this information out, he continues on with the communication. He addresses the risk perception and fear factors of the stakeholders. It's important to understand that your employees have a lot of questions that your senior leadership may not have. But you've got to put yourself in the shoes of your employees or their families. Will work continue? Will we be able to get to work? Will we be able to get home? How will I care for my family during this time, dependent upon the crisis? And then prepare clear and concise messages to help get the message across. I'll quote Samuel Clemens again. It's an old quote where he apologizes to a friend for writing a long, poorly written letter, but he didn't have time to write a good short one. You know, Twitter has created an environment where we actually have to learn to communicate in very short, concise pieces. And it's not 120 characters. You have to actually plan for maybe hashtags, and hashtags get you into the search stream when it's needed most. And you may also need to include, you know, the name of your organization or other pieces of information. Some of the challenges we see when people use tools to communicate automatically is those tools may put a message out on Facebook and Instagram and LinkedIn and Twitter and your website simultaneously, but not all of those tools read the message in the same way. As a matter of fact, we've had one school system where on Facebook the message looked beautiful, but when it's shared to Twitter from their main website, all it shared to Twitter was a URL with no content, no words, no verbiage. And so no one understood what these weird URLs were showing up on the Twitter stream. So you really have to be conscious of how all of the tools deliver your message, and then prepare targeted messages for the event, the people, and again, their perceptions. Message map worksheets are great. When you're done with this session today, if you go to our website under firestorm.com/brief, there will be a brief from this session, and there will be some of these sample message maps within the document, the brief from the session. And you can just start with these simple message maps. Address the question or concern, the impact of the crisis. So let's say we have a flooding situation. What are the questions of concern? Well, certainly the questions in concern are different for different stakeholders. Can we still put our product out? Is our manufacturing environment still going to be able to operate? Can our employees get to work? Are employees at the facility unable to leave the facility? Who's going to care for my children? Are schools closed in the community? What are our community officials saying? So you start off with a high-level event and then address, what would my questions be? What would our leadership's questions be? If I were a customer, my questions would be, are you going to still be able to deliver my product on time? Is there going to be a delay? Am I going to be compensated for that? What is the impact on not only our business, but on those people who have the concern, your stakeholders? And then start crafting key messages to address those concerns. Sit down with your team and play devil's advocate. Have someone put themselves in the shoes of your customer, your vendor, and ask the questions that they would ask and script those out. And then what medium are you going to use to deliver this message? And keep in mind, not all mediums deliver your message in the same way. As we continue on with message mapping, understand that we then want to drill down into, from the top level event to different aspects that may happen as a result. So let's say we have an office closing, or a tree came down and took out power, so our school is closing. Who are our stakeholders? Are there multiple? Can we use one message to address multiple stakeholders? And then start drafting your key messages out. When this occurs, when a crisis occurs, and it's not if, it's when. it's not going to be exactly as you imagined or envisioned it, but just having these message maps ready to go will allow you to do what Jim Satterfield, our CEO, says all the time, which is it's easier to edit than create. Jim says that for a very good personal reason. Jim was a CEO during 9/11, and after and during the event, they were sitting in a conference room and decided as a leadership team they needed to let their employees go home. People needed to check on relatives to make sure they were safe. They needed to talk to their children. It was a huge event in our history. And so Jim said to the human resource person, go ahead and send an email out to everyone and let them know we support them. If they need to go home, they should go home. And the human resource, bless her heart, she went back to her desk and she sent out an email very quickly, and she was very shaken up and in shock. And sadly, that message said, if you want to live, leave. Now, she meant to type, if you want to leave, leave. But of course, she was upset and concerned about her own family, and that is what happened. And it added a secondary burden to her, and it scared employees. So we really want to be conscious when we're creating messages for our stakeholders, how we're going to address their question or concern. And once we've done key messaging, we want to have supporting information for that messaging. You know, there are a lot of senior leaders out there that say, put me in front of the cameras, I'm great. I don't know if you all remember the webinars we did on the West Virginia poisoning of the water crisis, but I think we saw in that situation, and there's a link to it in the brief, by the way, of the press conference where we saw the president of a company who was completely unprepared for the questions that were asked of him, especially after 27 hours with no sleep. So when you prepare your key messages, we really want to think about what is the information that supports the message that we're putting out. Let's say we had a food recall from our kitchens or our facility or in our company's cafeteria, and we put a message out that says that, you know, there was a product that was recalled and we took it off our shelves and we've got another quality product and everything's fine. What happens when the second question that comes in when a microphone is put into someone's face and someone says, well, how long were you poisoning your employees? How are you going to answer that without saying, hey, we weren't poisoning anyone and getting into an argument? We want to be very careful and think through, again, all of these types of scenarios. Because when we do, it buys us time. It buys us time so that we can keep people and property and families and our customers safe. This guidance is going to help you create clear and timely messages to your audiences and your stakeholders. We want to deliver messages that maintain visibility in a positive way and help people make positive decisions through news conferences, social media, and press releases as appropriate only. You are under no obligation to communicate during a crisis. And we want to make sure that if public officials or those in charge are involved, that we defer to their official communication about a situation. We do want the ability to correct errors in reporting and deliver targeted messages that, frankly, are coming from a culture of strategic maturity. This is what we're looking to achieve, communication from this fourth block on the right in the Firestorm Crisis Management Performance Maturity Rating Model. This is included in the brief, and I hope you look at this because we really want to create a culture where we have a clear playbook for a major crisis with clearly defined roles and pre-established fast response for unique situations, highly efficient performance that's timely, that only consumes the resources needed, and with a proven messaging process and predefined messages for major event types, refined as appropriate for the situation. Once you've gone through our sessions, we hope that you will move forward and do a couple of different things. We want you to learn to control your messages and not to rely on others to deliver your message for you. And we want you to train and test, and we want to help you do that. On April 6th, we have a virtual stress test coming up. You can learn more about that on the Firestorm website under events. And this time it's on a cyber breach for any type of organization, for schools and businesses. What do you do when 45 million of your records are released? We want to make sure you've aligned your crisis communication plan with best practices, develop strategies for all types of media outlets, and finalize your crisis communication plan with message maps for event type and stakeholder. Contact us for Crisis Stop support and learn more about our Crisis Stop program. We want to help you in that first hour of a crisis to stop, analyze what needs to be done, and move forward. And we're here to help you with critical decision support. Remember to analyze your current insurance and response plans, and then, of course, always stress test your plan. You can download the brief of this session at firestorm.com/briefs. And Brenda, any last comments today as we close our session?
Not really, except I always learn something, and I made 5 distinct notes to myself to follow up on some items. So I really appreciate the opportunity to continue working with you, Karen, and I'm just amazed at all of the abilities that you have, and I hope our audience took away 2 or 3 bullet points themselves to follow up on.
Oh, well, thank you very much, Brenda. And for any on the call who are going to be going to the Disaster Recovery Journal's DRJ Spring World Conference in Orlando, we look forward to seeing you there at booth 608. Please come and visit us, and I look forward to attending myself. That will end our session for today. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you to the University of Alabama and the Bama at Work program and our best friend, Brenda Truelove. And if you have any questions, please feel free to contact us at webinars@firestorm.com. That will end our session today. Thanks for joining and have a great day. Goodbye.
Goodbye.